This video will cover section 1.6 on other types of equations. So previous to this section, we've discussed two types of equations. The first one being linear, and we said that a linear equation could be written of the form ax plus b equals 0, where a and b were numbers, and then x is our variable, and we noted that there was an exponent of 1 would be the largest exponent. The second type of equation we talked about was the quadratic equation. And we said the quadratic equation could be written of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And so in this equation, a, b, and c are still just numbers. X is still our variable, but now the largest exponent we see is a 2. Alright, and we discussed ways to solve linear and a couple of ways to solve quadratic equations. Now in section 1.6, we're going to discuss two types of equations. The first type we're going to discuss is rational equations. Now, with rational equations, there is one or more terms in that equation that are fractional. And we've seen some that are fractional, but this is different because the variable is now in the denominator. So when you see a fraction or a rational equation, the variable is going to be in the denominator. Alright, so they something like that. Alright? And since the denominator of a fraction can't be 0, once we get our solution to our rational equation, we have to check it in the denominator and make sure that it does not make the denominator equal 0. Alright, to solve rational equations, we first begin by removing fractions by multiplying by a least common multiple or a least common denominator. Once we've removed the fractions and simplified, we're going to determine, do we have a linear equation or do we have a quadratic equation, and solve accordingly. So linear will isolate the variable and solve, and then quadratic will use one of the four methods listed below. If it will factor, probably factoring is the easiest method. If it won't factor, you'll have to use complete the square or the quadratic formula, whichever one you choose. Once we get our solution, we're going to verify that it does not make the denominator 0. If it does, it is no good. Alright, so let's begin with this first example. Now, I see here that I have two fractions in my equation. Notice that there is a variable in that denominator there. Now what I need to do is get rid of those. So remember in algebra, if I need to remove something or get rid of it, I always do the opposite operation. So since 2 is dividing into 2x minus 3, and I need the 2 to go away, I'm going to do the opposite operation of division, and that would be multiplication. So when I multiply this fraction by 2, the 2 in the denominator and the 2 that I'm multiplying by divide each other out. And I no longer have the fraction. Now remember in equations that they are balanced. What's on the left is the same as what's on the right. So if you do anything to any part of the equation, you have to do it to everything. So since we multiplied this first fraction by 2, we have to multiply everything else by 2. Alright, second fraction, I need to remove x plus 1 because it is causing me to have a fraction. So since x plus 1 is dividing into 5x, and I need it to go away, I'm going to multiply by it, the opposite operation, and then they will divide out. Now because I multiplied this fraction by x plus 1, I have to multiply everything else in the equation by x plus 1. This keeps my equation in balance. See if will focus itself here. There we go. Alright, so now that we've gotten rid of the fractions, what we will do is just multiply whatever remains with each term. So in the first term, I have 2x minus 3 and x plus 1 are what remain. So I'm going to multiply those together. And then in the second fraction, I have 2 and 5x. And then in the last term here on the other side of the equal sign, I have 2 and x times x plus 1. and I'm just going to multiply those out. So 2x times x, 2x times 1, negative 3 times x, and negative 3 times 1, plus 2 times 5x. And then on the right side I have 2x times x is 2x squared, and 2x times 1 is 2x. Now I'm going to take each side at a time and simplify it as far as I can. So on the left side I have one x squared term, so I'm just going to bring it down. Then I have 2x's, negative 3x's, and positive 10x's will give me positive 9x's. So 2 minus 3 plus 10 is 9. And then I have that minus 3. So x squared, x, and no letter are not like terms, so I can't combine those or simplify them any further. If I look on the right side of the equation, I have 2x squared and 2x. I can't simplify those by combining them together, so I'm just going to bring those down. Now that I have each side of the equation simplified, I want to determine what type of equation I may possibly have. So when I look at my variable, I can see that the largest exponent I have on that variable is a 2. Alright, and that signifies to me quadratic. So I know when I have a quadratic equation, I first need it to be set equal to 0. So what I'm going to do to set it equal to 0 is take 2x squared and 2x. I'm going to move them over here to the other side so that this right side now equals 0. Alright, so we'll say minus 2x squared and minus 2x. So then what remains on the left side, notice 2x squareds, and I take away 2, I no longer have any x squareds, and I'm left with 7x minus 3. So once I set the equation equal to 0, I find out that really I have a linear equation. And so to solve this equation, I want to isolate the variable term and the constant term. So I'm going to move the 3 to the other side, and then I'm going to divide by 7, and that tells me that x equals 3/7. Now I can use my calculator to verify that this information is true by storing 3/7 in for x. Okay, then I will type in each side of my equation, so 2x minus 3 divided by 2 plus 5x divided by x plus 1. When I hit enter, alright, I get 4.28557, and then if I hit x for the right side, right, notice that the left side of my equation and the right side of my equation have the same value. That tells me my answer is correct. Now if you will use your calculator to verify your solutions, it will also tell you when you get 0 in the denominator. So if I take 3/7 and I come to my denominators that contain an x, such as this denominator here, if I insert 3/7 in x's place plus 1, will I get 0? So if I say 3/7 plus 1, or just simply x plus 1 because I have stored it in my calculator, alright, notice I do not get 0, therefore my solution is correct and I have not gotten 0 in the denominator. Now if you use your calculator, it will tell you when you get 0 in the denominator. Okay, and so maybe we'll see that in the upcoming problem. Alright, so for number 2, alright, I have two fractions. The denominators are the same, so really all I need to do is multiply everything by this x minus 5. So when I multiply the first fraction by x minus 5, those denominators go away and I'm left with an x. Now because I multiplied this fraction by x minus 5, everything in the equation gets multiplied by x minus 5. There's no denominator here, so we can move to the next term, which is 5 over x minus 5. I'm already multiplying by something that will allow me to cancel out that denominator. No need to multiply again. So what I'm left with is 5 times x minus 5 equals 5. Now I can see that once I get this multiplied out, that what I have is a linear equation. Alright? Just an x. So I'm going to isolate the variable term and move the 25 over with the 5 to get 30. Make sure you can tell that that's a 30. Alright, and then divide by 6. And that tells me that x equals 5. Alright, I'm going to check to make sure that my answer is good and that I don't get 0 in the denominator. So I'm going to store 5 in my variable. And then I'm going to type at each side of my equation. So I'll type in x divided by x minus 5 plus 5. Alright, and notice here I get divide by 0. Okay, and that occurs right here. Our solution is 5, so when I put 5 in this x's place, 5 minus 5 is 0. And what that tells me is this is no good. Alright, and I have no other number to substitute in for x. My only solution gave me 0 in the denominator, so that leads me to say that I have no solution. And you can either write the words no solution or the circle with the slash mark through it. Alright, let's look at number 3. Alright, when you look at the number 3, you can see there are 3 fractions. And now notice this one is a little bit different because it has the x squared in the denominator, and we haven't seen one like that. So if you encounter this, you always want to make sure that your denominators are completely factored, because we need to make sure that we're really getting a true least common multiple. So if I look, and usually a clue that you want to factor is an x squared. Okay, so if I pull out an x from here, I will have x times x minus 3. Alright, and I'm going to cross out this denominator because I don't want it to get confused with the factored form. Alright, now let's begin removing our fractions. So if I want to get rid of the denominator in this fraction, I'm going to multiply by x minus 3. Because I multiplied this fraction by x minus 3, everything else must be multiplied by x minus 3. Now, on the second fraction, I need to get rid of an x. So I'm going to multiply by x. Now this x and the x minus 3 and this x cannot cancel out. Right? X minus 3 is one thing together. You can't split it apart. Okay? So don't try to do that. You can only divide things that are being multiplied. And x is being has 3 subtracted from it. Alright, and then this last, I didn't multiply everything else by x. So because we multiplied this fraction by x, everything else must be multiplied by x. Okay, so in this fraction, the x minus 3's are going to cancel, and we're left with x times x minus 5 plus, in this fraction, the x's are going to cancel, and we're left with 1 times x minus 3. And in this fraction, the x minus 3's will cancel, and the x's will cancel, and I'll be left with negative 7. So then when I multiply that out, alright, I'll have x squared minus 4x minus 3 equals negative 7. Alright, I notice that it's quadratic, so I want to solve it for 0. So I'll have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Then at this point, I can use whatever method I like. For me, factoring is fastest, but you can still complete the square or the quadratic formula. Notice that these factors are the same, so I'm only going to use one of them because they're going to give me the same answer. I don't need to do both of them and solve for x. Alright, and when I do that, I'll add 2 to both sides and find that x equals 2. Now I can come back and check my solution, make sure it's good. Check it in my denominator. If I fill in 2 here, I get negative 1. That's not 0. And if I fill in 2 here, I get 2. That's not 0. So my solution is good.